If you saw a black woman step into the first-class carriage of a luxury train, dressed simply, no elaborate makeup, no designer handbag in sight, would you greet her with a smile, or quietly cast a doubtful glance her way? On the Astra Express high-speed train, where everything from the Italian leather seats to the champagne flutes whispers the word, privilege, a woman sat down in seat 1A. And no one knew that moment would shake an entire system once thought untouchable. No one in that cabin, not even the head attendant, knew that the very woman they dismissed was the powerful CEO behind the entire network that operated the train they were serving on. But what silenced the world? It was not the unjust slap she received. It was the way she stood back up, not with a scream, but with a silence so profound it made the entire carriage bow their heads. Movie camera, this isn't just Jasmine Carter's story. It is the story of millions who've been misjudged, and a wake-up call to anyone who believes that power gives them the right to look down on others. Are you ready? Watch until the end, because sometimes the biggest slap isn't dealt by a hand, but by the truth. Blank. Underscore. Blank. Blank. Underscore. Blank. The Astra Express high-speed train departed from the central station at 7:30 a.m. gliding past rows of urban streets, slowly waking up beneath a veil of morning fog. This wasn't just any train. It was a symbol of the elite, where every carriage was designed like a five-star hotel on wheels. Polished walnut floors, soft golden lighting, Italian leather seats with personal massage settings, and champagne served before the wheels even began to turn. Everyone dressed as if heading into a world summit. Tailored suits cut to perfection. Daytime evening gowns sparkling with sequins. And then, a woman stepped in. No one looked up at first, but when her simple high heels echoed softly across the hushed wooden floor, a few eyes began to turn. Jasmine Carter, a black woman in her late 30s, wore a navy blue suit, simple, but tailored with surgical precision. No flashy logos, no glittering accessories, only calm in each step, and a quiet confidence that radiated like an invisible ripple. She wasn't trying to attract attention, but it was precisely that unforced grace that made others take notice. Jasmine stopped in front of seat 1A, the exclusive VIP seat at the front of the carriage, beside the largest panoramic window, and gently placed her leather handbag in the compartment below. Every motion was neat, not a single wasted gesture. But just then, a tall figure approached, polished shoes gleaming, uniform pressed so crisply it could have been drawn with a ruler. Lauren Whitmore, the head attendant of the VIP car, arrived with a smile she'd rehearsed thousands of times. But that smile only appeared as she greeted the white couple seated in 1B. When she turned to Jasmine, it vanished immediately. "Good morning," she said, her tone polite, yet cold. "I believe you may have entered the wrong carriage." Jasmine looked up, her eyes calm but deep, like a still lake that hid entire worlds beneath. "I didn't," she replied softly. "I'm exactly in the seat assigned to me." Lauren blinked, her gaze trailing over the logo-less outfit, the tidy hairstyle, and Jasmine's deep brown skin. She nodded slightly, though her suspicion showed plain on her face. Without another word, she turned and resumed serving the other passengers, leaving behind a whisper thin but icy chill in the air. The carriage fell silent again. But somewhere, someone had just asked themselves the first question. Who is she? And, does she have a ticket for this car? Jasmine, however, paid no mind. She merely smiled faintly, sat upright, and turned her gaze toward the wide window where the landscape began to blur in high-speed motion. She knew this was only the beginning. Blank. Underscore. Blank. Blank. Underscore. Blank. The rhythmic sound of the train gliding over the tracks echoed like the heartbeat of the journey itself. But in the first-class carriage, no one was listening. Everyone was too busy, watching. Not out of curiosity, but out of unease. The presence of Jasmine Carter, calm and silent, had stirred something unnamed in many of them. A discomfort at seeing someone, different, dare to enter a world they believed wasn't meant for her. She didn't do anything. She didn't say a word. She simply sat there, as if she belonged. And that, more than anything, unsettled a few passengers. Lauren, the head attendant, returned a few minutes later, her smile now even stiffer than before. Sorry to bother you again. But, she leaned in, her eyes briefly glancing at the ticket resting on Jasmine's wooden tray table before pausing. Seat 1A is a special tier, reserved for our platinum guests only. Are you sure there isn't some mistake? Jasmine held her gaze, still composed. She didn't look surprised. She wasn't offended. She simply picked up her ticket, lifted it slightly toward Lauren, a gesture that wasn't confrontational, but more like helping the other woman avoid embarrassing herself. You're welcome to check the passenger list, Jasmine replied, her voice soft yet clear, like a melody that doesn't need volume to be heard. Lauren didn't take the ticket. Instead, she gave a dry smile, a blend of politeness and challenge. I don't need to check. I know my regulars. I've worked here long enough to recognize who belongs where. The air in the cabin thickened. A middle-aged businessman furrowed his brows. A young woman looked up from her laptop, and a woman in a glittering gown whispered to her husband, her eyes flicking briefly to Jasmine, then away just as quickly. Jasmine placed the ticket back on the table, still utterly composed, but this time, she leaned slightly toward Lauren, just enough, and spoke as if offering one final piece of advice, before it was too late. You really should check the list. Sometimes what you think doesn't quite match the truth. Lauren straightened up, her cheeks flushed, not with embarrassment, but with anger. Being challenged by someone she believed didn't belong had sent heat rushing to her face. You know what? Lauren said through gritted teeth. I'm tired of people demanding privileges just because they think they deserve them. This seat isn't for you. A heavy silence fell, and then, Jasmine didn't respond. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She simply remained seated, buttoned her coat, adjusted her posture, and turned her gaze back to the window. The train continued to race forward. But inside that first-class carriage, something had just gone off track. Blank. Underscore. Blank. Blank. Underscore. Blank. The air inside the VIP carriage had never felt colder. Despite the thermostat still holding a perfect 23 degrees, Lauren turned on her heel and walked away. But the frustration boiling inside her wouldn't let her calm down. She stopped at the service counter, pulled out the small tablet where the passenger list was stored, and in a rare moment, hesitated. Her finger hovered over the top name, Jasmine Carter, marked Sapphire Black Priority, with a special identifier code she had never seen before. Instead of acknowledging it, Lauren closed the screen. She didn't want to believe it. Across the cabin, Jasmine remained seated, composed. She pulled a hardcover book from her bag, The Power of Quiet. An accidental but pointed choice. One by one, the other passengers glanced at her, then looked away, as if her gaze reflected questions they didn't want to confront. Why isn't she saying anything? Why isn't she angry? Or, does she actually know exactly who she is? Lauren returned. This time, her voice no longer carried the tone of politeness, but the forced command of someone clinging to power after logic had slipped away. You have two options, she said loudly, loud enough for every passenger to hear. 1. Move to the standard class, I'll arrange a seat. Or 2. I call security at the next station. A murmur rippled through the carriage. A young man arched a brow and whispered, she probably didn't buy a ticket. An elderly woman shook her head. There was someone who tried sneaking into first class before. Jasmine closed her book. She looked at Lauren, not with anger, but with the calm gaze of someone who'd been misunderstood far too many times, and had learned she no longer needed to justify herself. Do whatever you think you need to do, Jasmine said. Her voice wasn't louder than a whisper, but it carried the weight of a verdict. At that very moment, Grace, the junior attendant, stood by the hallway, her hands slightly trembling. She was the only one who had actually seen the passenger list. She knew Jasmine belonged here, more than anyone else. Grace took a step toward Lauren and opened her mouth. I think we should double-check the info. Because, Lauren cut her off, I don't need anyone telling me how to do my job. This is my situation to handle. Grace stepped back, her eyes swelled with conflict, caught between what was right and the fear of losing her job. A few passengers began shifting in their seats, turning to watch, pulling out their phones as if sensing something bigger was unfolding. They didn't speak, but their eyes had changed. Sharper. Tighter. More breathless. Jasmine remained seated, adjusting the cuff of her sleeve. Then, she gently tilted her head. You're putting yourself in a dangerous position. Lauren, are you certain you understand what you're doing? Lauren let out a sharp scoff, masking her unease behind defiant bravado. Who do you think you are? That question, within the next hour, it would become the biggest regret of her life. Blank. Underscore. Blank. Blank. Underscore. Blank. The atmosphere inside the first-class carriage had shifted. Gone was the comfortable quiet of a luxury journey, replaced by a suffocating tension, not from the temperature, but from glances now tinged with suspicion. Jasmine sat silently in seat 1A, reading her book, her legs crossed discreetly and neatly. The midday sunlight streamed through the window, casting a soft glow over her, as if time itself had paused in her corner of the train. But the others weren't still. They shifted, whispered, exchanged sidelong glances, as if Jasmine's very presence was a mistake that needed explanation. And then Lauren returned. This time, she held a glass tray of sparkling water, each tall, slender glass lined up like trophies of high-end service. Lauren moved down the aisle, stopping carefully at each passenger. Mint lemon water for Mr. Raymond. Original sparkling for the lady. Ice or no ice, ma'am? She continued, but when she reached Jasmine's seat, she didn't stop, didn't look, didn't ask, didn't leave a glass. She walked right past. Jasmine looked up, her voice soft, yet impossible to ignore. Excuse me, may I have a glass of water? Lauren froze for half a second, then turned her head, her gaze sharp as a blade. I'll be back when I'm free. It wasn't the answer of someone busy, but of someone pretending to be, just to avoid having to act with fairness. A middle-aged man nearby furrowed his brow. An older woman blinked, startled. People were starting to sense something wasn't right, but no one said a word. A few minutes passed. Jasmine subtly shifted to get more comfortable. One leg extends slightly near the aisle. Not in the way, not disruptive, not attention-seeking. Lauren returned, still carrying the same tray. But this time, she didn't avoid. She didn't step around Jasmine's foot like she had done with others. She walked straight and deliberately let the point of her stiletto heel strike Jasmine's shin. The tray tipped. The chilled water cascaded over Jasmine, drenching her blouse, her skirt, and pooling at her feet like rage unleashed in liquid form. Lauren gasped, loud and theatrical. My goodness, you should watch where you sit. Look what you've just done. The entire carriage turned. A sudden crash, a trail of water, and a black woman, soaked, in the middle of what they called a refined space. Jasmine looked down at her wet skirt, then raised her eyes. Her voice was steady, neither louder nor softer than before. I was seated still. You walked directly into me. Lauren narrowed her eyes, lips curling into a venomous smirk. Oh, so now I'm supposed to predict when someone doesn't know how to sit properly. The murmurs started. I don't think she did anything wrong. The attendant did that on purpose. That was just rude. Jasmine stood up. Her jacket clung to her, soaked through, but her gaze remained unshaken. She looked at Lauren, not like someone defending herself, but like someone calmly waiting for her accuser to unravel. I'm simply asking to be treated like every other passenger, she said slowly. If respect is too much to expect here, then maybe the person who doesn't belong. It isn't me. And in that moment, Lauren raised her hand. No warning, no restraint, no justification. Smack. A slap cracked through the air, cutting across the carriage like lightning through a false calm. It didn't just land on Jasmine's cheek. It struck the wall of silence everyone had helped build. Grace, the junior attendant, gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. A female executive froze, her wine glass suspended midair. A man in the adjacent seat stood up, his voice outraged. What did you just do? Jasmine said nothing. She touched her cheek gently, as if checking on an old wound that had just been reopened. Then she lowered her hand, stood upright, and in her eyes, there was no anger, only a light that made Lauren recoil. The silence of someone who has waited far too long to be heard. She spoke just 4 words. You just made a mistake. And the entire carriage understood. This wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. Blank. Underscore. Blank. Blank. Underscore. Blank. After the sharp crack of the slap echoed through the air, the carriage fell into a suffocating silence. Not the kind born of indifference. But the silence of people was too afraid to face the truth that had just become undeniable. A black woman had just been struck in the middle of a first-class cabin. And no one had intervened. Jasmine said nothing. She didn't scream. She didn't curse. She simply stood there, her face unnervingly calm. A red mark was slowly spreading across her left cheek. But her gaze remained steady. It was so unwavering, so deep, that Lauren, the one who struck her, involuntarily stepped back half a pace, even as she tried to mask it with a posture of defiance. "You just ended your career," Jasmine said. Her voice was no louder than a whisper, but it sliced through the thick fog of prejudice in the air like a blade. Lauren scoffed, but the smirk on her face was twisted. "Don't think you can scare me," she snapped, gripping the now empty tray with whitened knuckles. "I've done this job for over 10 years. I know who's who." Jasmine didn't respond. She calmly sat back down, adjusted the damp cuff of her sleeve, and pulled a handkerchief from her bag to gently wipe the water pooling on the table. Every movement was tidy, measured, and no aggression, no retaliation. But within that stillness, everyone could sense that something had shifted. She opened her handbag, pulled out her phone, typed a few brief lines, and placed it on the table. The screen remained lit, displaying one simple, chilling line: "Activate Ether Protocol, Code 7. Lauren glanced at the screen, uncomprehending. "What do you think you're doing?" she hissed, trying to assert control through volume. Jasmine didn't look at her. She leaned back gently, her eyes turning to the window, where the Green Mountain Range receded behind the armored train. "You'll find out soon enough," she said softly, like a breeze. But by then, it might be too late. A wave of murmurs swept through the carriage. A man unlocked his phone. A notification popped up. "This train will make an emergency stop at the nearest station due to a critical situation. Please remain calm." "What's happening?" a woman asked in alarm. "Are we stopping? In the middle of nowhere?" Lauren saw the same message. Her expression shifted. "Probably just a system glitch," she stammered, but even she didn't believe her own words. At the front of the cabin, Grace, the junior attendant, quietly stepped back. She looked at Jasmine, then Lauren, then back at the passenger list, still open on her tablet. And then, for the first time during the trip, she pulled out her phone. "Operations Center? This is Grace, an assistant in the VIP car. We have an urgent incident. Head attendant Lauren Whitmore has physically assaulted a passenger." "Yes, the victim is Jasmine Carter." She paused. "Yes, Jasmine Carter." At that very moment, the front carriage door slid open. 3 men in gray suits entered, each wearing internal operations badges. Leading them was the operations director of Astra Express. They didn't need to ask. They didn't need to investigate. They walked straight to seat 1A. Lauren froze. Her hands trembled, tucked behind her back. The professional smile vanished. The arrogant confidence was now nothing more than an empty shell. The director stopped before Jasmine, gave a respectful nod, and spoke with quiet formality. "Ms. Carter, we deeply apologize for what has just occurred. Everything has been fully reported, and we were alerted to your presence through the emergency protocol." Jasmine looked up. Her expression remained composed, but this time, there was no patience left. Her eyes now carried the resolve of someone who no longer wished to remain silent. "Then I believe it's time we begin the process," she replied calmly, "because it's not just me, but everyone witnessing this, who deserves to see justice served. Blank. Underscore. Blank. Blank. Underscore. Blank." The carriage seemed to hold its breath. Every eye was now on Jasmine, the woman who had spent the entire journey silent, composed, never raising her voice, never boasting. And yet now, 3 men in tailored gray suits, each wearing high-level executive badges, stood before her with eyes full of deference. Lauren was visibly shaken. Her eyes darted around, searching for an explanation, for something, anything, to cling to. But all she found were judging stares, hushed whispers she couldn't quite hear. and her own hands trembling beyond control. Jasmine slowly rose to her feet. Not hurried, not dramatic. She adjusted her damp cuff, smoothed down her wrinkled blouse, and lifted her gaze to address the entire cabin. "My name is Jasmine Carter," she said, her voice not loud, but every syllable rang with clarity. "I'm the CEO of Ether Tech, the technology conglomerate responsible for developing the operational and safety control systems used throughout the entire Astra Express high-speed rail network." A shockwave rippled through the cabin. Gasps, whispers, barely contained. "She owns the system? The architect behind the command platform? That's billionaire Carter?" Lauren took a full step back. Her face turned as pale as porcelain. Her lips moved, but no words came out. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, excuses caught in her throat, dying before they formed. The operations director bowed lower this time, his tone firm and resolute. "Ms. Carter, what happened today is entirely unacceptable. Effective immediately, we are suspending all authority held by head attendant Lauren Whitmore, pending investigation and disciplinary review." Jasmine did not look at Lauren. She stepped forward, not as a victim, but as a leader reclaiming her voice. "I had no intention of revealing my identity," she said slowly. "I wanted to experience this journey not as a CEO, but simply as a fellow human being." Then she turned to face Lauren. For the first time since the slap, their eyes met, not as an attendant and passenger, but as an offender and the one now holding the power of consequence. "You didn't know who I was. And frankly, that shouldn't have mattered. But you chose arrogance over professionalism. You didn't just insult me. You insulted every silent person who never had the power to speak up." Lauren stammered. I didn't know. If I had known." Jasmine raised a hand, not in threat, but as a firm gesture to cut off any further excuses. "You don't need to know who someone is to learn how to treat them with respect. And not knowing is never a valid reason to do what's wrong." The cabin fell utterly silent. Then, a single passenger began to clap. Then another. Then, all at once, the entire first-class carriage erupted in applause. Not because Jasmine was a billionaire, but because she had said what everyone, at some point in life, had longed to scream. Respect is not a reward for status. It is a basic right every person deserves. Jasmine turned to Grace, the junior attendant who had remained quiet but whose eyes now shimmered with hope. She nodded gently. "I know you tried to speak up. Thank you for your courage. My office will be in touch regarding new leadership training opportunities." Grace stood frozen, her eyes welled with tears. She nodded repeatedly, barely believing what she just heard. Lauren, meanwhile, remained rooted in place, a shadow amid blazing light. Her pride, her arrogance, her sense of authority, now completely stripped bare. Blank. Underscore. Blank. Blank. Underscore. Blank. The applause in the first-class cabin surged like a rising tide, not out of admiration for Jasmine's power, but because they had just witnessed something rare. A black woman, publicly humiliated and dismissed, now standing tall, owning the room with grace and authority. Lauren stood frozen, like a statue that had just cracked apart. The fear in her eyes could no longer be concealed. Every word Jasmine had spoken echoed like a mirror, reflecting not just her behavior, but the toxic, silent system of discrimination she had come to embody. The operations director bowed slightly toward Jasmine. "We await your direction, Director Carter." Jasmine took a deep breath. She turned back toward Lauren, stepping closer. There was no threat, no contempt, just an unwavering gaze, so clear and direct that Lauren could no longer look away. "Lauren Whitmore," Jasmine began, each word delivered with sharp, deliberate calm. "As a senior executive of Ether Tech, the organization responsible for managing the Astra Express high-speed rail system, I hereby declare, you are terminated, effective immediately." The entire cabin froze. Lauren looked as if the blood had drained from her body. Her face was pale, her lips trembled, forming words that never came. No, I didn't know." Jasmine's eyes didn't waver. Her voice was steady, like velvet wrapped around steel. "No one asked you to know who I was. But every passenger, regardless of race, background, or how they dress, deserves respect. You failed. Not because you didn't know who I was, but because you never knew who you were. Lauren staggered. Her hand reached out to the back of a seat, as if trying to hold onto the last shred of dignity. But Jasmine wasn't done. She gave a subtle signal to the operations staff behind her. And then, 2 uniformed security officers entered from the rear of the carriage. One of them bowed slightly toward Jasmine. We've received the formal report. Ms. Carter, please confirm. Do you wish to press charges for assault? Jasmine turned to Lauren. This time, her gaze wasn't cold. It was the gaze of someone who had endured far too much forced silence, and was now choosing not to stay silent anymore. I don't believe in revenge, she said, measured and clear, but I also won't allow abuse to go unanswered. She struck me in front of dozens of witnesses. And as a citizen, I demand this be handled according to the law. The officer nodded. A pair of gleaming handcuffs was produced. Lauren backed away in panic. No, please, I was angry. I didn't mean. But her hands were already being drawn behind her back, locked in place. The entire cabin remained still, watching. No one laughed. No one cheered. Only silence remained. Not the silence of guilt, but the kind where remorse begins to take root. Jasmine turned to face the passengers around her. She stood tall, adjusted her collar, as if she'd just concluded a high-stakes boardroom meeting. I apologize that you had to witness this, she said, but maybe it's time we all stop pretending we didn't. Blank. Underscore. Blank. Blank. Underscore. Blank. The door at the back of the carriage closed after Lauren was escorted out. But the sound of the metal handcuffs clinking still echoed in everyone's mind. Not because of cruelty, but because it was the sound of consequence. A wake-up call not just for Lauren, but for everyone who ever believed that no one notices when they discriminate, humiliate, or misuse power behind a veil of silence. No one spoke. The entire cabin seemed deep in thought, contemplating something far beyond a single act of insult, but rather the way society so often tolerates such behavior in silence. Jasmine didn't sit down right away. She remained standing, facing every passenger, like a guide on a journey that had just changed course. No microphone, no podium, yet all eyes were on her. I don't see this as a personal victory, she began. Her voice was low but resolute. I don't need applause for being a CEO. I just want to remind us. Every human being, no matter their role or status, deserves respect, not because they carry a fancy business card or have a full bank account, but because they are human. No one laughed. No one whispered. Instead, a few passengers began to lower their heads slightly. A silent gesture of apology. An elderly woman with silver hair placed her hand over her heart. A young businessman closed his laptop. His eyes were slightly red. Grace, the junior attendant, clenched her hands, as if holding tightly to a courage she had never dared show before. The operations director stepped closer to Jasmine, his voice filled with gratitude. Ms. Carter, on behalf of the entire Astra Express network, please accept our deepest apologies. We are ready to take any necessary actions to ensure this never happens again. Jasmine nodded gently, but she didn't respond immediately. She paused, not from anger, but from a reflection rooted in something much larger. I want access to the full training and personnel complaint records from the last 12 months. She said carefully. I will personally review the company's cultural sensitivity policies and lead the standardization of behavioral evaluation for both attendants and route managers. The cabin remained silent. No one had expected this. That after everything that had happened, Jasmine wouldn't retaliate. She wouldn't ban. She wouldn't pull funding. She would reform. She turned to Grace. And I want her, Grace, to be transferred into EtherTech's management training program. Those who stay silent out of fear are still more honorable than those who stay silent out of arrogance. But the ones who dare to speak, even once, prove they have the heart for leadership. Grace stood frozen. Her eyes glistened. She nodded, speechless, but her hand gripped her name badge, as if someone had just handed her back her belief in this profession. Jasmine finally sat down, for the first time since everything had begun, and gently opened the book she had not finished earlier. Not because everything was over, but because now, Everything was truly beginning. The train continued its journey after an emergency stop at the technical station. But what happened in the first-class carriage, none of the passengers would ever forget. And then, as is the way in the modern world, a video was uploaded online. No fast cuts, no filters, just raw footage capturing the eyes, the words, and that fateful slap. In less than 24 hours, the video had garnered over 8 million views. Thousands of comments poured in from around the world. Rock, she didn't just claim justice for herself. She showed us how to confront injustice not with rage, but with intelligence. Hands clapping. I was once kicked out of a restaurant just for dressing modestly. This story made me feel like I'm not alone. Speech balloon. Respect isn't earned by power. It's shown by how we treat people who seem to have none. A week later, Jasmine appeared on national television. In a special interview on the show, Voice of Change, the host, a veteran journalist, opened with a question that made the entire audience hold their breath. Ms. Carter, if no one knew you were a CEO, if you were just an ordinary woman, what do you think would have happened that day? Jasmine paused. Then she looked straight into the camera. Not to answer, but to deliver a message. What would have happened? Maybe I would have been escorted to economy class. Maybe I would have been slapped, and no one would have recorded it. And maybe I would have had to sit in silence. Just like thousands of others have always had to sit in silence. She stopped briefly. Her eyes softened. Then she continued. But what matters isn't who I am. It's why we only listen when the person has a title. The interview became the most inspiring video of the month on YouTube. Universities invited Jasmine to speak. Media outlets referred to her as a symbol of dignified resistance. But Jasmine remained grounded. She didn't launch a PR campaign. She didn't turn the story into personal branding. Instead, she returned to her work, reforming the internal systems at Ether Tech. Quietly, but profoundly. And as for Lauren, she was formally prosecuted for public assault. At the preliminary hearing, she bowed her head in apology. Not just for the slap, but for the way she once believed she had the right to judge someone's worth by their skin color or hairstyle. At an internal meeting held by Jasmine for Ether Tech leadership, Lauren was quoted as saying, "We can't change the whole world in one day. But if every person in our system, from dispatchers to attendants, from technicians to managers, learns to see others through the lens of respect, then at the very least, we stop contributing to a world of discrimination. Blank. Underscore. Blank. Blank. Underscore. Blank." It was a quiet weekend afternoon, 3 weeks after the incident on the train, when Jasmine Carter once again boarded an Astra Express journey. No security escort, no swarm of cameras. She wore a simple beige turtleneck, dark jeans, and her hair was tied low at the nape. Simple, humble, just as she had always begun every journey. Not with fanfare, but with purposeful quiet. This time, when she stepped into the first-class carriage, every gaze greeted her. The attendants bowed deeply. A little girl ran up to offer her a paper flower. Clumsily folded, but full of sincerity. The elderly couple from that day, now fully aware of who she was, smiled warmly. Jasmine nodded to each of them. No speeches, no spotlight. She sat down in the same familiar spot, seat 1A, and opened the book she hadn't finished reading the last time. But before she turned the first page, she took out her phone, opened her inbox, and read the email subject line. National launch of the Respect First program across high-speed rail system. A piece of her reform initiative, personally designed, had been approved. From now on, every staff member will undergo renewed training. Not just in skills, but in mindset and character. A young man, seated 3 rows away, leaned slightly and asked softly, "Ms. Carter, your story inspired me deeply. I've never seen anyone so calm in the face of such disrespect. You didn't even get angry. How did you do it?" Jasmine looked up, smiling gently, yet profoundly. "Because I've learned something. Anger might make people fear you, but calm will make them question themselves." The young man nodded, then fell silent, as if he had just received a lesson more valuable than any book. The train began to move. Outside the window, the city drifted into the distance, giving way to the peaceful curves of distant mountains. Jasmine leaned back in her seat. Her eyes no longer guarded, but the eyes of someone who had weathered storms, and refused to let them turn her heart to stone. Not long after, Jasmine took the stage at a special TED Talk, titled, Yellow Square, Truth Doesn't Have to Shout, It Just Has to Stand Firm. Her talk ended with a line that brought the entire room to its feet in applause. Justice doesn't come from the loudest scream. It comes when one person, no matter how small, dares not to look away from what's wrong. If you've ever been dismissed, if silence has ever forced your head to bow, remember this: as long as you're still standing, you've never truly lost. Rainbow and That Story, on a high-speed train, didn't end with a slap. It ended with a door opening. For justice, for courage, and for all of us. Loudspeaker. And what about you? Have you ever been misjudged because of your appearance? Have you ever stayed silent while someone else was mistreated? Share your story in the comments below. Because who knows? You might be the one someone out there needs to be inspired by today. Pushpin. And if you believe that respect is a basic right, not a reward, like, share, and subscribe, so you never miss stories that can awaken the heart and shake the very system we live in. Blank. __blank.